This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 14 edition of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. I am Jason Jarvie, your host. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvie the King. And if you're in a normal fantasy football league, it means it's time for the fantasy football playoffs. Unfortunately, for a lot of you, you're probably not in your playoffs, but hopefully I'm talking to all you people, and I'm guiding you through trying to get you a fantasy championship ring or belt or trophy or however you celebrate a championship in your league. And I'm going to try and guide you through these next couple weeks because it isn't, you got to play the entire season. You can't just go week 1 to week 13. You got to win week 14, 15, 16. And if you're in one of those crazy leagues where you play in week 17, where you rest all your good players, I really hope you're not in one of those leagues. But anyways, I'm here to help you through. So let's break down some of these matchups we got this week, and let's get a victory in the playoffs for you all. I'm going to start with my home team. The Detroit Lions are at home taking on the Chicago Bears. They're looking for some revenge from week 4 when they were at their lowest point in the season, went 1-3. They've completely flipped it around at 8-4 at the top of their division. And I really think unless they have a colossal collapse, they're going to put a hurting on the Bears this week. So I think Matt Stafford, Theo Riddick, Golden Tate, and even if Marvin Jones and Eric Ebron are able to get on the field, I think they're all really good plays in their respective positions. Theo Riddick in PPR. Matt Stafford is a good start either in any league, really. Golden Tate he's moved himself up from the bottom in the beginning of the season. He's at least a wide receiver too. And then Jones, if he plays, I think he's a flex consideration. And I even think Anquan Bolden is a flex consideration because Matthew Stafford is spreading the ball around. And if you're in one of those leagues where you get extra points for return yards, Andre Roberts has been pretty dangerous, so he could get you those extra points on punt returns, and maybe he even gets you a punt return touchdown. You never know. On the opposite side with the Chicago Bears, they are a big, hot, steaming mess. And with their quarterback, starting with their backup third-string quarterback, Matt Barkley, I don't think he's going to be able to do a lot. Now, the Lions have really made other bad quarterbacks look good this season. I just don't see that happening with Matt Barkley this week because he doesn't really have anybody around him. Alshon Jeffrey's still serving his suspension. Marquise Wilson is questionable. He's probably not going to play this week. And the one player that is going to be getting the ball is going to be Cameron Meredith. And I think he's only a flex consideration this week. Otherwise, I'd probably just leave him on your bench. The only guy who has really any value would be running back Jordan Howard because, that's really their only game plan is to hand the ball off. So they're going to hand the ball off to Jordan Howard probably at least 20 times a game. And he should get you some points. He'll get you at least a running back 2's scoring total this week. That takes care of this matchup. Going on to the next game at the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Buffalo Bills. Both of these teams, the Bills are essentially out of the playoffs, but the Steelers, they are really still fighting to get into a playoff spot. So I think Big Ben, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown, those guys are all locks. Anybody else, I'm a little wary of. All those other receivers, they're too hit or miss. And when you're in fantasy football playoffs, it's just too difficult to rely on somebody who you're not sure if you're going to get those points on. So if you need to take that risk to get your playoff win, Eli Rogers would probably be the guy that I'd suggest. Otherwise, I'd leave him on your bench and go with somebody who is going to get you a more solid point total. On the other side of the ball, with the Buffalo Bills. This could be the first week, I think since week 2 of the season, that they actually have both of their starting wide receivers. Sammy Watkins has been back the past 2 weeks, and now Robert Woods looks like he may actually play this week as well. So that could be a good thing for Tyrod Taylor. I don't start Tyrod Taylor unless I absolutely have to in a playoff scenario. But it could be an interesting play if both Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods are healthy and playing, and they could get you some point totals. I like Sammy Watkins as a flex play this week. LaShawn McCoy has been a stud, and I think you still roll him and play him going into the playoffs, and this could be a really interesting matchup. Next matchup I got for you is the Denver Broncos taking on the Tennessee Titans, and this seems like two teams that are going in opposite directions. The Broncos started hot, and they seem to be fading off a little bit in a tough AFC West. And the Titans, where they didn't really look too good in the beginning of the year, but they've sure gotten hot the last couple weeks, and they're going to be battling for the AFC South. So Trevor Siemian, still questionable, not sure if he's going to play. But Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch, whoever's going to start this game for the Broncos, I don't really want to start them in a playoff week for fantasy football. So I'd leave them on the bench. Devontae Booker, I think he's a pretty decent start as a running back too in the playoffs, just because I think he's getting enough touches to get you the points it's getting you enough points to help you out. So the wide receivers, though, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, I've been pretty low on them the past couple weeks, and I think it's rightfully so, because regardless if it's Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch, neither of those guys are really putting up big numbers. So it's really going to be tough for one of those wide receivers to stand out and really give you some really good production. So I don't like either of those guys this week. On the opposite side of the ball, I actually like a lot of these Tennessee Titans. Even though they're going up against a tough defense, I think they should still be able to get some points. With the Titans, I think Marcus Mariota has really started to come into his own, and he's been a pretty solid quarterback. He might have a little bit less production this week just because the Broncos are a really good defense. But I think Mariota, he's a top 10 quarterback at this point for fantasy football. DeMarco Murray, he's still playing like a top 10 running back, so he should be played as at least, he's a running back 1 on pretty much any team. And I think I saw a stat where the majority of teams that made the playoffs, DeMarco Murray is on a lot of those teams. So you should start him and feel pretty comfortable about playing him. And then Rashard Matthews has been the recipient of Marcus Mariota's becoming a better fantasy quarterback, so I think you start him. I don't feel that comfortable about Tajay Sharp or anybody else there, but Delaney Walker, he's also a top 10 tight end. He's going to be good enough to start in this game, and we've seen tight ends be able to expose the Denver Broncos at times, so I think he's going to be a good start this week too. Next up, we got an NFC East matchup. The Washington Redskins go to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, where the Redskins, they are looking as hot as really any team. Kirk Cousins can't do any wrong at the moment, and I think he's going to continue this going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. So Kirk Cousins, I think he's moved himself in as a top 10 quarterback for fantasy football. And at running back, Matt Jones is still day-to-day, and Robert Kelly has been serviceable, so I think he's a borderline running back too, and you might be maybe a flex consideration, but there's probably going to be somebody else who's going to get more points than him. At wide receiver, though, Jamison Crowder and Deshaun Jackson, I think both of those guys are dependable as either a wide receiver 2 or a flex, because Kirk Cousins loves Jamison Crowder. He's at least going to give him the ball, 8 to 10 times a game, and Crowder has shown that he has really solid hands. And Deshaun Jackson is just he's that big play guy, and he's been dependable. So I think either of these guys could have a big game. Not so sure about Pierre Garçon. And then Jordan Reed, he's been dealing with concussion issues. He plans to play, even though he's saying that he's questionable. He is planning to play. So I would be very cautious if you're a Jordan Reed owner. Make sure you have your backup tight end ready. And also, I would hope that you have that tight end in like a 4:00 game, because if you're going on that Jordan Reed is going to play, and maybe he plays, but maybe he only plays for a down here or there. So I'd be very careful. On the Philadelphia Eagles side, Carson Wentz, he's not going to do anything. Carson Wentz was pretty good in the beginning of the season, and he just really isn't doing anything right now. So you can't start him in your fantasy football playoffs. And I really don't like a ton of Eagles. Ryan Matthews has been hit or miss. Darren Sproles hasn't been as dependable as he has been. And the Jordan Matthews, the Josh Huffs, they're not going to give you dependable points. So unless the Eagles come out of nowhere and are able to compete with the Washington Redskins, I just don't see them doing very good in this game. Next up, I got the Houston Texans taking on the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. These are two teams that are fighting in their divisions. They're fighting to get a playoff spot. But Brock Osweiler, not a fantasy football quarterback, not a starter, unless you're in a 2-quarterback league. And even then, I think he's right on the outskirts of playing. So he's not a good option. Lamar Miller has been good enough to still be a high-end running back too, and he can possibly get you into that running back 1 scenario. But I think going up against the Colts, who they don't have a very good defense, he could have a big game this week. And the only wide receiver who's really going to get anything for you on the Texans, and I'm even not sure if he is going to get you anything, is DeAndre Hopkins. So, if you have a better option than DeAndre Hopkins this week, who might be projected to score more than him, I would score him, because you can't afford to get a 3-catch, 30-yard day from DeAndre Hopkins when you're in your fantasy football playoffs. So be careful with him. On the other side of the ball, with the Colts, Andrew Luck has been way better as of late. And that's what I predicted at the beginning of the season, is he was going to struggle early, and when it came down to the playoff run, he was going to really pick it up. And I think he's going to do exactly the same thing. At home, going up against not that great of a defense, I think he's gonna get this game, and he's gonna take it over. And Andrew Luck's gonna have a pretty solid game, and that means great things for T.Y. Hilton, because for whatever reason, he just loves T.Y. Hilton. He always goes to him, and he's his main target. And probably his second favorite target is his tight end, Dwayne Allen. You saw in the last game last week that Hilton got a ton of yards, but Allen was the guy who got all the touchdowns. So if you are struggling to find a tight end to play, and Dwayne Allen is sitting out there on the waiver wire, this might be one of those games where Dwayne Allen could actually win you a game for you. And then the fountain of youth founder, Frank Gore, he just seems to get yards every week. He's a low-end running back too, but he's going to get you points. They got to run the ball somehow, and they just continue to give it to Frank Gore. So he's going to give you some points this week. And I hate saying to start him, but I can't tell you to sit him. So I think you have to start Frank Gore this week. Next game I got is the New Orleans Saints taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think last week it seemed like an anomaly. And I come back again to my favorite team, the Detroit Lions. And it always seems to be so unpredictable when you play the Lions, because I would have assumed that Drew Brees and the Saints would have been able to move up and down the field against the Lions, but they held Drew Brees without a touchdown. And on top of that, he had a couple interceptions. So if all you Drew Brees owners out there, you got to be a little upset. So going up against the Buccaneers, I think the Saints, if they weren't desperate last week, they're even more desperate this week. So they're going to bring their A game. I think you still have to start Drew Brees. Even if you are in the playoff situation, you probably don't have another quarterback that you can put in over Drew Brees. I may be wrong. Maybe you have a Kirk Cousins or a Matt Ryan in your bench that you could put him over Drew Brees. But I really think more than likely you're going to start him, and he's going to be good for you. I just look at last week. You can't be great every single week. You're not going to throw 400 yards and 5 touchdowns every single game. So Drew Brees will probably have a bounce back week, and I think you'll probably see bounce backs from everybody on that team. I think Mark Ingram, they were out of sync last week, and I think they're gonna get him more involved. And I think he's at least a running back 2. I think he's a very high-end running back 2, because he has the potential to give you running back 1 numbers. But running back 2 is where I would feel most comfortable slotting that guy. And then you got Michael Thomas, Brandon Cooks, Willie Snead. Willie Snead in that game last week, he was dropping a lot of balls. And I'm a little concerned about him, and right now I think he's at best a flex play, but I would really look at the rest of your team and see if you have somebody better that you can plug in outside of Willie Snead, because I really think Michael Thomas has emerged as one of Drew Brees' favorite targets. He's a reception guy. He's not the flash in the pan. He's a guy who's gonna rack up targets and get you some fantasy points. And Brandon Cooks is really that big play guy who they're gonna bomb it a couple times a game, and Brandon Cooks is really gonna be the recipient of those balls. So I think you start Brandon Cooks and Michael Thomas respectively, and I think Willie Snead, I would leave him on the bench this week because I'm not sure about him. And Kobe Fleener, he's had an up and down season, and I would have figured he would have had a good game last week against a Lions team who can't defend tight ends, and he just wasn't able to do it. He dropped a couple passes, so I would be careful starting Kobe Fleener this week. If you have nobody else, he's right around the number 10 in tight ends, but I would be careful just in case you get a big fat 0 out of him. On the opposite side of the ball with the Buccaneers, Jameis Winston, I think he's right on the outskirts of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league. I'm not sure, once in a while he'll get you top 10 numbers, but more than likely he's going to be outside the top 10. So if it was my decision, Jameis Winston probably isn't my starting quarterback, and this isn't the week that I'm going to mess up my winning formula. So I think Jameis Winston, I probably wouldn't start him this week, even though it is a decent matchup. If you're having questions, like maybe Aaron Rodgers going up against the Seahawks, that's not a great matchup, and you had Jameis Winston in your bench, that might be a situation where you think about it, because maybe Jameis Winston actually has a better situation than him. But barring that, Doug Martin, I think he's at least a running back too, and Mike Evans, you pretty much have to start him every single week. But everybody else on the Bucs, I'm not really sold on at the moment. Moving on to a matchup that I just mentioned, the Seattle Seahawks going to Green Bay to take on the Packers, and these are two teams who are fighting for playoff spots. The Seahawks are fighting to get a bye in the first week of the playoffs, and the Packers are fighting to try and get into that final wild card spot. I mean, if they're even still in contention at this point to win the NFC North, they'd have to win out, and it'd be kind of tough. It starts with this game, Seahawks-Packers. And the Seahawks, Russell Wilson, I think he's moved himself back up into a pretty dependable quarterback. I'm not saying he's the best quarterback in the league, but I think he's gonna give you some points. So Russell Wilson, I would start him this week. Thomas Rawls, I feel more comfortable putting him in a flex position because I'm just not sure what he's going to do. If he's one of your only running backs and he's one of your best running backs, you put him in your running back position. But I think he's actually a decent flex play if you are set at the running back position. And then Doug Baldwin is their number one receiver. I think he's a go for this week. And then Jimmy Graham, I think he might actually have the biggest week of all for the Seahawks this week. And on the other side with the Packers, Aaron Rodgers is a little dinged up, which does concern me, and I think he's going to have a tough matchup. Unless he can weave some Rodgers magic, I think it's going to be a tough matchup for them. And I don't really like Aaron Rodgers this week. He's still a top 10 quarterback, but that's basically on name alone. So I'd be very careful starting Aaron Rodgers this week. The Packers have no run game at all. James Starks is back, but you don't even know who the starting running back is. So is it James Starks? Is it Ty Montgomery? Is it a host of any other guys? I wouldn't start any Green Bay running backs, especially in fantasy football playoffs this week. But the wide receivers, I think it goes Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, and Randall Cobb. And really, the one guy that you can only depend on is Jordy Nelson. Devontae Adams is going to give you some big weeks here and there, but you just never know when they're going to show up. So be very careful with him and with Cobb. But I think Jordy Nelson is definitely a solid start this week. Next, I have your Sunday night football matchup with the Dallas Cowboys taking on the New York Giants, which is a huge matchup, has so many playoff implications in just the NFL, but this is probably going to have some implications for your fantasy football team as well, because you have a bunch of big name players going. You have guys like possibly Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, Des Bryant, Jason Witten, Eli Manning, Rashad Jennings, OBJ, maybe even Sterling Shepard, who knows? But I think this is going to be a very big game, and I think the Giants are going to struggle, and because I think they're gonna break down with the rest of the season. When they're going into the last quarter of the season, I just don't see them being able to keep up with the rest of the teams. They got to play the Lions too, which that's a little bit of a joke. But anyways, you got the Cowboys, Giants. With the Cowboys, Dak Prescott being a rookie quarterback, I don't feel comfortable having him being my starting quarterback, especially if I'm in the fantasy football playoffs. He's doing okay, but I think he's going to have a tough time against the Giants. I just don't see him putting up the fantasy numbers you need to win a fantasy game. So I would leave him on the bench this week. It's the same situation of Jameis Winston, where I just don't feel comfortable. But Ezekiel Elliott, I feel completely comfortable because he's one of the, if not the best running back in the game right now. So you put him in, and you pretty much expect him to get around 100 yards and at least a touchdown, if not more than that. Des Bryant's he's kind of a question mark. He's been hit or miss since he came back from his injury, and I think he's going to get you some points, but if you have anybody better that you can start over Dez at this point, I would probably go that route because he still has a rookie quarterback thrown to him, and their main offensive weapon is Ezekiel Elliott, in running him the ball left, running him the ball right, and then throwing the ball to Ezekiel Elliott. So that's pretty much the Cowboys game plan. On the other side of the ball, with the New York Giants, Eli Manning, you're going up against a tough defense, and I'd hope for him to be able to be consistent. And this might be one of those games where it's a shootout, but it may just be one of those defensive battles. So I'd be very careful starting Eli Manning this week. And Rashad Jennings, I think he's a low-end running back too. He's been getting some consistent carries, some consistent yards, but he hasn't had just one of those breakout games. If you need somebody to just kind of anchor that running back 2 position, Rashad Jennings isn't a bad play here. And then obviously they have the big name wide receivers. You got Odell Beckham Jr., who's pretty much a stud all around, and you're going to start him no matter what. He may give you nothing, but you have to start Odell Beckham, especially if you're in. He probably is one of the reasons why you're in the fantasy football playoffs at this point. So you're starting him, and then Sterling Shepard, I think you put him in as a flex consideration this week, because maybe if the Cowboys try and shadow OBJ as much as they can, it's going to open up some lanes for Sterling Shepard. So I think he's a sleeper this week. I'd put him high in the flex consideration. And the final matchup I got you for this week is Monday Night Football, Baltimore Ravens against the New England Patriots in Foxborough. It's going to be a tough matchup for the Ravens, and I just don't see them doing really good. But the Ravens, kind of like the Lions, they just can't keep getting it done. They keep getting wins. So Flacco, he's not a starting quarterback, and I wouldn't, even as a risk play, I wouldn't advise you to start him this week. The running backs, you got Kenneth Dixon and Terrence West, and it's a split between them. You never know who's going to get the ball. It's really a split all around in the running back and the wide receiver situation, because you got Steve Smith, Mike Wallace, Rashad Perriman, and Kamar Aiken, and Joe Flacco is going to spread the ball around. He's basically a game manager with a gigantic arm. You may get a big play, a long touchdown from one of those guys. If I had to rank them, I'd probably go Steve Smith, Mike Wallace, and then Rashad Perriman. And Steve Smith is really the only guy that I feel comfortable starting as a wide receiver 2 or a flex. And then Mike Wallace, I think, is really only a flex consideration. The other guys, I mean, you're really only starting them in emergency situations. So I really wouldn't have them on your radar. And then Dennis Pitta, he showed up out of nowhere last week with 3 touchdowns, and just, nobody probably had him in their starting lineup. So I would probably leave him on your bench for this week, because I don't foresee him having another gigantic game like he did last week. The Ravens offense, it isn't built to throw to the tight end. You'll have a big game here or there, and then you're going to see nothing from them for a couple more weeks. So that wraps up the matchups for this week, and that wraps up this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I wish all of you the best of luck in your fantasy football playoffs. Hope you win, and if you don't, listen in next week, and maybe you'll get to the toilet bowl. Anyways, until then, later, nerds.